So, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to say it is a great pleasure to present this early stage of research results together with Oleg Rollens, my friend, and he is the team leader, the project manager from the CTBTO side, and CTBTO was funded this project. Imagine wielding an ability to read confidently, clearly the signs of plant stress generated by ground motion. What a great support would that mean in an OSI context to narrow down the third zone. It is not that simple though. It is a complex and a very nice, exciting challenge. Remote sensing is considered as a very powerful tool and technique to collect large volume of data of extended areas. It is able to capture a lot of information, physical, chemical, and structural constitution of the surface, and we can always get back to it and use it for change detection. Depending on what we are looking for, we can select different spectral regions, which spans from the visual range up to the thermal imaging range. All has its own benefit. There is none of these wavelength ranges which is good for everything. In terms of plant stress, I would say the near-infrared, short-wave infrared is really informative, and thermal imaging can be of great use. There are several relevant OSI observables which can be detected by means of remote sensing platforms and sensors. Now we will focus on vegetation stress, which is indeed a vegetative stress. There have been several researches in the past dealing with plant stress. Two of those which are particularly relevant in terms of the OSI. 1 kiloton of chemical explosion happened underground, and researchers managed to detect plant stress in the vicinity of ground zero. And they repeated some ground-based measurement, just simply dropping potted plants from different heights, trying to measure and detect the plant stress the fall generated. And they found really interesting reactions in different wavelength bands, in different intensity. They concluded that the results are really interesting, and they provide vast options to detect plant stress. However, they agree that further researches are needed because this is really a complex area, because plant stress can happen as an answer to drought, intense sunshine, lack of nutrients, pests, or diseases. In 2012, in Hungary, there was a CTBTO test. The aim was to see if shallow and low-yield detonation can create superficial signs which can be detected from different levels of remote sensing measurements. And on the sideline of this project, we used the contact spectroradiometer to perform measurements on an Elagnus tree in the vicinity of the explosions, and found very interesting that before and after measurements showed relevant changes. 30 minutes before the detonation and 30 minutes after the detonation indicated 3 to 10% of changes throughout the whole detected region, which spanned from 350 nanometers up to 2,500 nanometers. And what was the most interesting part for us at that time, that performing consecutive measurements after the stress event, which was the explosion, and some burst of underground water as well, but in the vicinity, so we can conclude that no water fall on the leaves, so it was not the reason of the change of the spectral characteristics of the leaves. But the change reduced in time, and after returning back on site after 30 days, the change disappeared. So the plant stress recovered to its normal state. Thanks to the support of CTBTO in 2024, we could launch an exploratory research on plant stress and ground motion. We agreed to use vibration to mimic or model the ground motion, and we designed an experimental plantation that we can consider a homogeneous and a normal state vegetation without any other disturbing effects or stresses, to see if there is any change in the normal spectral characteristics if we compare it to those plants where we stressed the vegetation, or we just simply measure those which never received any stress. So we agreed on that we will use plants which are habitant in Sri Lanka, because at that time we were in preparation for an event in 2025 in Sri Lanka. So we selected wet forest climatic zone vegetation habitant in Sri Lanka. And these were evergreen plants, so very convenient because we could perform measurements throughout the whole year as they remained active. And we used a plant growing chamber with artificial light and the normal laboratory with natural light to nurture the plants. We brought them up from very small seedlings. And automated irrigation and nutrient supply were used to provide identical treatment for both sets of plants. This is the experimental arrangement, plants receiving artificial illumination, plants with natural light. Two sets of plants were stressed with two vibration programs, 20 seconds and 40 seconds, with the same intensity of 2G acceleration. We had one control set of samples which never received any stress, and then reserve if the stress is too intensive that any of the plants would not survive. 3 leaves on each plant were selected and tagged, and these plants were measured throughout every cycle of the measurements. We used a lab sieve. We heavily modified it to provide a stable, repeatable, adjustable vibration device that can carry the load of the plant pot and can hold securely to avoid any mechanical damage of the plant. And we tested really the upper limits of the plants to avoid any mechanical damage. We performed contact measurements, and we performed measurements before the vibration, immediately after the vibration, 15 minutes later on, and 30 minutes later on. And during the cycles of the measurement, we used our observed 14 days of minimum time between 2 cycles to give the time to the plant to recover. Where we are right now, we have now a very well-controlled lab environment, a homogeneous evergreen plantation. We worked out the stress method, which is able to provide a scalable, measurable, and repeatable vibration. And we collected a vast amount of data. And now the delicate part should happen, the data processing. At this point, we would like to share just some teaser with you some average spectra because we already see some minor indication of the stress, even at the scale of average spectra, which means the average of several thousand measurements. Together, the artificial and the natural light, but already we can identify 3 different wavelength ranges where we can see some deviation in the spectra. In the upper graph, you can see some small deviation that indicates some changes in the structure of the leaf. And lower, you can see some deviation that indicates some change in the water balance of the leaf. Short-term change means a change that happens immediately after the vibration. Long-term change means we compared plants which we tortured through several cycles of measurements and stress cycles and compared them after months with those plants which never received any stress. And interestingly, here we can see some long-lasting differences as well in the same regions. However, I would say some more structural changes seemingly visible in case of the long-term comparison. It's important to mention that we assume that artificial light and natural light on their way will change the pigment concentration and so the shade of the leaves. So it may hide some of these stress reactions, and that was the original reason why we decided to set 2 sets of experimental plantation in work. Careful conclusions at this stage. We can say that the stress is a success because with this 2G acceleration, we managed to get some reaction from the plant in form of stress. We observed changes which tell that there is some structural changes, even in short term, but on long term, definitely there is some structural changes. And on short term, we assume that there is more changes in terms of the water balance of the plant. If I were a plant, I would sure stop evapotranspiration immediately if I got 2G of acceleration. And that was one of the hypotheses when we started the experiment. I have to admit, we can say that there are still some caveats and room to improve. So this is just the comparison for now of the average spectra. We will dig deeper with the detailed modeling and multivariate statistics to torture the data. And the 2G acceleration sounds much, but still it is a simplified model of a real ground motion. And we also need to admit that we are really close to the margin where we can say that this is within the range of uncertainty of the device and the measurement itself. However, we are talking about thousands of measurements, so these ranges are indicative for us, so we will proceed accordingly with the detailed processing of the data. Future plans, as I already mentioned, detailed modeling, supervised and unsupervised classification, not mentioning the AI, what we have learned in the previous days during the conference. And also, we would like to introduce thermal techniques and video spectroscopy for 2 reasons. One, it would be a really interesting presentation together with nice images. The second one, because thermal imaging technique is really sensitive to plant stress, as if the plant stops evapotranspiration, the temperature change is inevitable, especially if we have high ambient temperature. And in terms of video spectroscopy, we can capture the change of the signal online, so we can capture the propagation of the stress signal of every single leaves. And with this, I would like to thank you your attention, and once again, thank you for the good cooperation with the CTBTO.
Okay, so
questions?
I think we can go for one quick question.
Really interesting presentation, Cornel. I think it's brilliant. In a past life, I was an archaeologist, and we used to do this kind of stuff for detecting crop marks to find things underground. Have you got any idea what the underlying mechanism for the changes in the plant? Like, have you talked to a plant biologist? Because we found it was nearly always not the plant itself, but the soil.
You are referring to imaging, remote sensing equipment.
That's right.
Okay, the short answer, I use the contact probe. So
we did the same thing because when I did my PhD.
Background. Okay, so if we go down in resolution, as the technique evolves, pixel size provides us more comfort to deal with the leaf spectra only and not the background. Years ago, it was difficult to capture, let's say, pure or clear spectra of the plant surface itself, because yes, the big background was always a disturbing effect, but for this, there are some models available to filter the background and try to focus on relevant wavelength bands.
Yeah, no, just thinking what's the mechanism for the changes in the plant when you give it a shock, really?
Okay, so I would say I think we can expect some tear in the roots, which again affects the water balance. We can expect tears in the tissue overground as well. Again, it will affect the water balance for sure. Other things, I would accept closing the stomas immediately, which will clearly affect the spectral reflectance as well. So probably these would be my first guesses.
Thanks. I'll catch up with you later. I've got some ideas.
Thanks for your question.
Okay, thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
I think there was another question, but as we have to give the floor to the next presenter, I think.
Thank you very much. It's actually a careful investigation, and results are interesting from the point of view that an inspection area might be in the forest also or a vegetated area. My question is that continuation period might continue up to about 100 days. And have you investigated more than 13 days spectral changes or plant stress? That's first question. And second, could it be distinguished from a season changes of spectral? For example, now September, in 2 weeks, the spectral properties of the trees in Vienna would be different from today's. I mean, season changes. Have you checked it? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I will start with the second one. That's the beauty of the nature. It changes. And of course, it would be tricky if the season going to its end, because other probably more relevant changes will happen. So I would say it always depends. Okay, and or has to be measured and tested. The first question, no, we didn't have performed any measurements longer than 30 days. However, the long-term comparison happened after several stress cycles, but months have passed. So in general, I can tell you that yes, there is a change that lasts more than months. In the OSI context, again, it depends. It is not mature enough at this phase to say that this is the silver bullet for the next IFE, but it is a really interesting research project that has high relevance for the future.
Thank you. May I also add that it's a good subject, not necessary for field exercise, but for a tabletop exercise with presentation of results to expand possible areas of inspection, because I have seen in the panel discussion the focus was on desert or on frozen ground, but it might be different. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are moving to our last presentation.